This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. And if you're looking for podcast production support, we highly recommend them. Find them at trisonic.co.uk.
The reason you will win versus another brand is if you are the more trusted choice in the room. So at a board level, the conversation should be, how do we make sure we're the most trusted brand in our sector?
Welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. Trust is an issue close to our hearts here at the Media Leader. We are not shy about communicating the importance of evidence-backed, quality, accountable media. Yet the public's trust in this industry has generally remained low. The public doesn't necessarily have a positive perception of the advertising business, nor the businesses that earn a large share of the ad dollars spent by brands. But trust is important. It's what drives consumers to purchase goods and services from one brand over another, to give their attention to one media channel over another. And in a world of AI slop, misinformation, falling trust in traditional institutions, in a world in which trust is increasingly at a premium, it's no surprise that trust has been made a core topic among industry leaders in recent months and to start 2026. Trade bodies the IPA, Isba, and the Advertising Association are highlighting the topic heavily. That includes at the annual LEAD conference, which takes place this Thursday, and in a report released last week by the IPA that found trust-building ad campaigns improve business outcomes. Matt Bourn is the communications director at the Advertising Association. James Best is the chair of the Committees of Advertising Practice, CAP, and Credos, the Advertising Association's think tank. On February 3rd, the duo are releasing a new book published by Kogan Page titled Trusted Advertising: How to Harness the Value of Trust in Your Brand. Given the importance of trust as a subject to us at the Media Leader and our readers, I wanted to sit down with Bourn and Best to discuss the book, whether advertisers are sufficiently valuing trusted media channels, and what they can do to better build trust in their brands. This is our conversation. I hope you enjoy. Matt Bourn and James Best, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So we like to start these episodes off with the same question, and certainly to people that I haven't spoken with on the podcast before, and that is, why did you get into the media industry in the first place? And I know you guys have been around the block a little bit, so James, why don't you start?
50 years before the mast, man and boy. Yeah, I've been around mainly the agency world, and that was where I was a planner and then a chairman of a big agency. And then on the international side, that was about 30 years. And the last nearly 20 years, I've been involved in the regulatory side with the ASA and with a lot of research aspects of the world of advertising through the Advertising Association and Credos.
Did you grow up wanting to get into this industry?
No, I was always very suspicious of people who said they did when I interviewed them for jobs. No, I fell into it. There was a film with Roger Moore in it, and he was so cool and had such a nice car and girlfriends, and he was in advertising, and this is in about 1971, that I thought that looks like a pretty cool thing to do. And it was.
I'm very glad to hear that. And Matt, what about you?
That's brilliant. So I fell in love with the media when I was a paper boy. Oh. Every morning I'd deliver about 60 papers around my local town. And in my teenage brain, I was kind of playing through this idea of putting more newspapers with the same front page story on through letterboxes and others. So I'd put more copies of The Sun through than The Mirror versus copies of The Mail through versus The Times. And what I started to sort of try and understand was, wouldn't it be really, really powerful if you could be the person that puts the story on the front page of the one that goes through the most letterboxes? And so I started to get quite interested in communications. And then I ended up at university studying media and business, came out of that straight into the world of PR and communications, did it for media, did PR for movies for about 4 years, and did things like Face Off and Con Air and The Rock and Scream and all sorts of really cool stuff. But always behind the scenes, it was kind of media. And I believe that we need a strong media in order to hold the rest of, if you like, society to account. So over the course of my career, I sort of gravitated more and more towards B2B media. And then around 8 years ago, I was approached to go and work at what was described as my perfect train set, which it turns out it is, which is to lead the communications for the Advertising Association. So it's making the case for responsible advertising, which funds media, which is essential to democracy. So that's kind of where I am.
Was there a favorite film that you worked on back then?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the Nicolas Cage kind of Face Off, and The Rock and Con Air would just, put the bunny back in the box. It's just, it was perfect.
Awesome. Talk to me as well, because you've got a new book coming out, and this is not the first book either of you have published. So what has sort of motivated you to get into also publishing about the subject of media and advertising?
Oh, so I guess, this is the second one that I've co-authored. So the first one was around advertising in time of climate change. And to be fair, that the publisher approached me after speaking at an event. And at the time I said to Stephen, our CEO, look, this has happened. What do you think? And he said, we should be writing books on these subjects at this particular time. The first one we did with Seb Munden. And then we spoke with Coke and Page again. They were really keen to publish a second book. And it, in my head, it made sense to do a book on trust for a number of reasons, which we'll come on to talk about. But actually, from a timing point of view, it coincides very well with the Advertising Association's centenary year this year. So the plan was to try and, if you like, 100 years on, look at what on earth is happening to trust in society, and then where and how does trust in advertising fit in that conversation. So I pitched that book. They said, yeah, we want to publish that book. And then I was like, the person that I should ask to help me write that book would be the man we refer to as the wise man of advertising, James Best.
Yeah, I haven't written a book before, and I didn't know how much hard work it was going to be, even though Matt did most of it, really. So I was inveigled into doing it by his honeyed words and the fact that Stephen also backed him up. And
Stephen Woodford.
Stephen Woodford, and you obviously can't say no to Stephen. So we ended up writing it together. But to be fair, I have been involved in research on, and written a few bits and pieces about trust in advertising over the years, being involved, as I say, with the ASA by chairing CAP. In particular. So it was sort of close to my heart as well as my head.
So the book is titled Trusted Advertising, How to Harness the Value of Trust in Your Brand. Matt, you mentioned that things have certainly changed over the course of both of your careers, but especially just within the past 25 years, not the 100 years that the AA has been around. How have the dynamics of trust changed over that period, especially as we've gone online a lot?
Yeah, so we start the book by almost kind of asking the question, what on earth has happened to trust in the 21st century? And there's no doubt that the way in which we trust and who we trust is changing. And we refer to pieces of work like the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is brilliant. Their 25 years kind of study of the moments where trust in the things that we inherently trusted in the 20th century were challenged, whether that was government, whether that's media, whether that's even NGOs as well as business. So we look at that sort of dynamic change in trust. But we also look at work by people like Rachel Botsman and her work around essentially the what she describes as almost the biggest sort of social transformation that we're living through, which is really driven by technology and social media, and this ability to essentially trust people that you wouldn't previously have thought you would be trusting. So a lot of people
you've never met before, don't know the background.
She makes the argument very clearly that we're not living, it's not like there's less trust in the world. It's just the way in which we trust and who we trust is changing. So she talks about trusting sideways rather than trusting top down, and makes the argument, that every day people get into the back of car with strangers and trust them implicitly to get them to the destination that they would be going to.
Do people still hitchhike much?
They don't trust, what have I said? Other people.
Yeah. It's interesting because if you look at the human behavior science, we interviewed a chap called Dan Bennett, who is at Ogilvy, about this. And, people are born to trust. Human beings are born to trust. We come out of the womb, and the first thing we need to do is trust the individual that's there to look after us and feed us. And, clothe us and keep us clean and keep us safe. So we are born innately with this kind of need to trust. So, and we quote a Chekhov quote about this idea that, if you can't trust humans, life becomes impossible. And I think that is at the core of this kind of 21st century disruption, this sense that maybe is life becoming a little harder because because who we trust and how we trust and where we place our trust is being upheaved.
I mean, the financial crash, 2008-9, really disheartened a lot of people and eroded their trust in government, finance, institutions. COVID, governments didn't exactly cover themselves with glory. People became very frightened and suspicious again, only, 10 years later. So, there have been kind of precipices where people's trust has fallen off the edge. At the same time, as Matt said, through technology, you've got trust pilots, you've got the whole reviews phenomenon. People can find other sources. People have other sources. People find other sources attractive. And word of mouth, as Bill Bernbach said way back, is the most powerful form of communication of all. So if people really feel they can get that personal, intimate, immediate piece of trustworthy help, then it's very tempting. So yes, you go from hierarchical to distributive trust.
And it's interesting as well, this kind of, if you look at COVID, businesses had in inverted commas, good COVID. They emerged as being more trusted because they showed that during a crisis, they could deliver and help people through that crisis. So it isn't like you can't rebuild trust as well. The Edelman Trust Barometer is really interesting with that, and the very latest version of that, the 2026, which they're formally launching, around about now. One of the key things that's coming out about that is trust in American companies, and the challenge specifically to trust in American companies because of the geopolitical situation.
Well, certainly lots of business leaders essentially going to the Oval Office and gifting Trump random things probably doesn't help their perception of the brands that they work for, right? I mean, think Apple, Microsoft, all of the major tech companies.
I think it absolutely depends on, we talk about, trust. Trust is a very personal thing, right? Nobody trusts the same way for the same reasons. And in the book, we talk about how, no sector of advertising is trusted the same way, right? So the finance sector is trusted at a different level to, say, clothing. It's trusted at a different level. And then within each sector, the brands that are in that sector are all in a battle, if you like, to be the most trusted or the least trusted. So airlines, is British Airways more trusted than Ryanair or Wizz Air? And then you then have your customer, and every customer trusts different. And one of the really interesting things that I found sort of thinking about the book was how, a first-time customer has a different trust need to a long-term customer. And thinking that through when you're thinking about your advertising and the relationship between your brand and the customer, I think is fascinating.
What I'm hearing a lot of is essentially that trust is subjective. And to put a sort of journalist spin on it or talk more on the media owner side of things, a lot of the sort of traditional sources of information have become distrusted by a large segment of the people. And this is especially true, especially in the American context, as you mentioned. But the number of people that I speak to that say, "Oh, I don't read, the Times or the FT or the Telegraph anymore. I get most of my information from an individual creator on a social media platform, independent writers on Substack." Equally, some people may place a lot of trust in a publisher like the Daily Mail, and other people would say, "No, I don't trust that at all." So how do you parse who is and isn't trusted when it is that subjective, especially in relation to media owners?
Yeah, I mean, it is both rational and emotional, I think I'd say, Jack. I mean, because there is trust in terms of, is this thing believable? Is this not my truth or truthy? Is it the truth? And that quite a lot of people are, relatively sensible and rational about. There's also trust in terms of, are these people good, trusty people behind this? Are they the sort of people who are actually going to go out of their way to look after me rather than just rip me off? And there is a difference, I think, between what can be a pretty rational level of trust in truth, and then a deeper level of trust, which you acquire probably, as Matt was suggesting, over time in brands as you do in people, because you realize that there's a degree of benevolence there. They have integrity, but they also are giving you something. They're giving you a positive experience, whether that's in media or in the creative of an ad. So I think there are, there's more going on, if you like, than one little word can sometimes convey.
Mm. In terms of trust in advertising, Credo's survey data is pretty consistently rated advertising on the lower side of the list of industries in this country. There has been a slight uptick since the Advertising Standards Authority released its own ad campaign, and that's been talked about quite a bit over the past couple of years. But generally speaking, I don't know if it's fair to say consumers trust this industry to be to their benefit on the whole. And as I reported this week, even practitioners within this industry have lost some trust in the organizations and leaders of the industry. There's a nonprofit called Inside Track. They've organized a group of anonymous senior leaders who are speaking out on the lack of progress on issues like sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and online harms. And I'm curious what you make of the current perception, both within and externally, to advertising, and can trust grow of this industry?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that. So the first thing I would say is that there is a difference between trusting the industry and trusting an ad that you see. So one of the things that we're very sort of closely studying is people's trust in an ad that they see. I see a national lottery ad on ITV during the footy. Do I believe that if I go and buy a ticket and my numbers come up, I'm going to win a few million? Yes, because that ad is trustworthy and legal, decent, honest, and truthful, right? So I think, the Credos research shows that public experience of trust in ads is pretty good. We've got new research coming from Credos at Lead, which will dig into what is the latest on the public's experience of advertising. And there are some really interesting sort of themes coming through. Which
Can you give me any hints?
I give you some. Well, James, we can talk a little. I think it's fair to say that the public's experience of advertising is evolving in reflection of the spend, in the way the shape of the spend is going. More and more online. So people's experience of advertising is more and more shaped by that experience online as well.
And that's more personalized advertisements, closer targeting, people constantly saying, oh, I was just speaking about taking a trip to Tahiti, and then getting ads served to you about Tahiti and feeling like, am I being spied upon? I mean, this is sort of the online experience so many people have.
Yeah, so there's upsides and downsides to that experience, James.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, as a starting point, why on earth should anyone trust advertising? I mean, there's a very healthy skepticism, I think, if you sort of take that first stance, because clearly most advertising is hoping to get something from you as well as you from it. There's a trade involved. There's a request, a piece of persuasion. So the natural and I think perfectly healthy default position of most people is a bit of skepticism. Take it with a pinch of salt is a phrase we often hear in research. Having said that, then, of course, there is a whole hierarchy of trust in those ads, and the creative content is crucial. The media context can be crucial. And as you're saying, where people are perhaps getting increasingly wary is through a fear about scams and fraudulent advertising, which is, as it were, beyond the control of most of us, but casts a bit of a shadow, as we're finding, particularly amongst younger people, interestingly, over their approach to the ads that are coming to them online. And that's something which has emerged more strongly, quite recently, I think because of a lot of media talk about it, as well as actual experience and sight of such ads. But it does pollute the advertising sphere, if you like. And that's something which really does need to be addressed, and the industry can help, but it's more powerful statutory authorities and the platforms that can really make a difference.
And then let's take the second part of your question. Why should we care that people trust the industry? We tackle that in the book. From a government regulatory perspective. Government intervenes when it doesn't trust an industry sector, as we saw in the finance sector after the banking crash, right? So So we have to care at an industry level as to whether or not we're trusted, because otherwise, our freedom to communicate about commercial, messaging will be restricted, in any given sector. So that matters. And then why else do we need to be trusted as an industry? Because of talent retention and talent recruitment. And I think it's fair to say that, there are societal problems that are bigger than advertising, that people are looking for, leaders generally, if you go back to the Edelman Trust Barometer, and businesses to help address and solve. And people have, different views on that. The beauty of a trade body is that a trade body is, where you can come and express those views. It's where you can look for examples of best practice and share those, and then try to, if you like, raise standards generally. That really is the role of a trade body to do that. So, we welcome any kind of views that are expressed about how an industry goes about being trustworthy.
Essentially, remain trustworthy, or the government will force you to become more trustworthy.
Yeah, well, that's true.
The
That's true of all industries. It's not just true of advertising.
Yeah.
That's true of all industries.
Yeah, that's the regulatory stakes, and we've seen that with government intervention on less healthy foods, which has been a bit of a tricky road, let's say, to negotiate from the regulatory aspect. Hasn't been comfortable at all, because governments aren't really set up to write advertising rules and codes. We know what we're doing. Unfortunately, government departments don't necessarily.
Yeah, so some poorly worded language ends up in a bill, and then suddenly the bill is delayed an extra year. That's essentially what happens.
It's taken several years. But that kind of intervention, doesn't help anybody. So demonstrating that we in the industry abide by the rules that exist, and they're proportionate rules, they're pretty sensible rules, and they're actually rules made by the industry. People have to remember, and the deal there is we're allowed to make the rules providing we commit to obeying them and enforcing them and funding the people who do that work. So that is, very much the fundamental need to make trustworthy ads. But you can go beyond that and make trusted ads by being better at your job creatively and in media terms, and really gain some competitive advantage, which is what the IPA's latest research is showing.
Yeah, I was going to sort of add to that, James. I mean, the other thing that's happened, if you like, while we've been writing the book, and what we're seeing is that the business case for trust, the reason you will win versus another brand, is if you are the more trusted choice in the room for any customer. So at a board level, the conversation should be, how do we make sure we're the most trusted brand in our sector? And for us, as we wrote the book, that was then, right, okay, how do you make sure then through your advertising work that you're doing everything you can to deliver that value of trust? And the IPA's very latest work is probably the most compelling example yet of the benefits that come from an advertising campaign that builds trust, because essentially it supports you with your customer retention. It allows you to maybe charge a little bit more. There's a premium in there. Customer acquisition is cheaper, right? I mean, versus your competitors, because you're the more trusted brand in the choices. So there's a lot that comes in terms of business benefits from being more trusted. And so the crux of the book is essentially this kind of question of, like, with your next advertising campaign, is the net effect that your brand is more trusted? And if not, why not?
How can brands accomplish that? Obviously, it's different for every brand and every sector as well. But in the excerpt that I was pleased enough to have received and then read as well in advance of this conversation, this was a section titled Your Media Choice Sends Trust Signals to People. What's the key finding within that section? And how much does channel matter?
Your media choice matters. I mean, does it? There's a couple of chapters called "Does it matter where you show up?" Short answer: yes, it matters a lot. It matters to your customers, and it matters in terms of building, the trust in your brand. But it's not the only thing that you need to do. The creative quality, the creative enjoyment, the creative engagement of the advertising that you make is also critical. So it's a mix of things that you're looking at. And I think it probably starts out with a conversation about trust as almost as a KPI, as part of the measurement that you're putting in place for your next advertising campaign, and really understanding that, thinking of what do you want to be trusted for, and are you delivering it?
Yeah, and I mean, on the media side, it's not that there are sort of this medium is always trusted, this medium is not trusted. It's a matter of taking care. I think it's a matter of thinking carefully about how you're appearing, where you're appearing, in what company are you appearing, and does that fit what you want your brand to be seen as? And I think sometimes, for the reasons that, yes, certainly Media Leader has written about very often, it's difficult for marketers to achieve that. I think it's easier now. I think there are a lot of tools available, and with analyses like, or services like Origin maturing, I think it'll be easier again for people to realize that they can be more selective, they can be more careful, with good results, with positive business results. And that, I hope and imagine, will lead to greater trustworthiness and trustedness from that aspect of their decisions that they're making.
In the section you write, quote, "Big public shared media elicited the strongest brand response from people. Cinema, TV, news, and radio tended to perform best." I know you just said, obviously, it depends. But equally, at a large scale, some media channels might be a little bit more trusted than others. It's kind of what I read into that. And yet media investment has been flowing in the opposite direction to other channels. And I've reported on this my entire 4 years of being at the Media Leader. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. We had Peter Field come on, and Newsworks and Lumen, they presented research on this subject as well, about how businesses can be more profitable if they invest in trusted channels. What's causing this problem where it feels like the trusted channels aren't necessarily the ones getting the most ad investment?
There's, again, a little bit to unpack on that one. I mean, the book doesn't go into brand versus performance, right? But I mean, performance, obviously, it's been one factor that's come into the mix. I think there's elements of advertising spend which is actually we publish the figures as AA Walk, right, quarterly. So we study them and see what's happening there. And the online share is kind of growing and expanding. But there's a lot of sort of e-commerce kind of related spend in there. There's other forms of spend in there, retail media, all kinds of things which are going in. So I think what we covered in the chapters is that every channel has its kind of unique way of helping you build trust in your brand. Okay, whether that's radio through that kind of theatre of the mind, or the podcast with that sort of really personal kind of connection with the podcast host, or whether that's out of home, that's that big, bold public promise. Each of them, I think the research, the signaling success research shows, there is a signal of you can trust me through the different choices of media that you include. What surprised James and I in the interviews that we did with marketers and other leaders was actually how much we ended up then having to write about influencers and the rise of influencers. We thought we'd write one section within the chapter, doesn't matter where you show up. We didn't. We wrote 2 chapters on influencers because there wasn't one marketer who was saying, I'm going to spend less money on influencers as a channel.
And that's driven by trust, there was desire to be.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a fascinating phenomenon. It ties in so well with that bigger picture about trust that Matt and I were talking about just now. And the really good results that people are getting back are, according to those making the videos, the influencers, the creators themselves, absolutely based on trust, on authenticity, credibility of what they do, and finding the right fit, the right brand fit, and letting the brands have to, as it were, accommodate and adapt themselves to the spokespeople that they're choosing. And again, it's about careful choice. It's about guardrails and everything else, of course. But it was just fascinating to see how powerful that personal trust that people can develop is in the context of the whole influencer marketing world.
I find it really interesting as well because influencers are not necessarily accountable in the same way that a more traditional media organization might be. Speaking, I work for a publisher. The publisher can get sued or held accountable if I did something wrong. Whereas if I'm, willy nilly posting about whatever it might be online, that's an entirely independent way of working. And so you see a lot of influencers that peddle misinformation or sometimes disinformation, but mostly people that might just say something wrong, and then they either issue a retraction or they don't, but they're not necessarily held to the same standard. And clearly people aren't worried about that, or they are, in the sense of they'll be very careful about which influencers they work with, but they do want to spend more money in this direction.
Certainly the consumers we've been talking to most recently are very aware that there's influencers and influencers. And they will very readily give you the list of the people that they think, are pretty much rubbish, and the list of the people that they really adhere to and trust. And one has to hope and believe that that's based on something fairly sane in terms of the experience.
But it might not be.
And sometimes it hasn't been. But they are, of course, subject, if they're taking money from marketers, to the same rules as any other advertisers. So again, we've seen an improvement, if I can use that word, in how influencers are acting and behaving, and how that professionalization, if you like, of the sector is coming along. And, with our own trade bodies, the IMTB, with agencies increasingly playing a leading role, with contracts becoming more and more sophisticated and comprehensive, I think, again, we're seeing that move in the right direction.
But I think it's worth bearing in mind, let's think about the 100 years of the AA, 75 years of telly, if you like, ITV celebrating its kind of, anniversary last year to that effect. And then you've got influencers and perhaps creators who are at best 10 years old in terms of a channel in comparison. So compliance rates are going to be really important for creators working with brands to be being trusted channels to customers as that particular channel matures. And it's a big job for the ASA, it's a big job for the IMTB, it's a priority for Isba and their members to be working with creators and influencers that they can trust. And the big agency groups that we spoke to about this as well, that specialize in the influencer, marketing side, we're all recognizing the importance of codes and compliance so people can trust the commercial content that they're seeing. So I don't think anybody's taking it lightly, but I think you look at the scale of compliance that's required across that volume of influencers and creators, and that's probably the next big sort of wave of responsible advertising we're going to need to tackle.
Do you think you'll be able to self-regulate, or do you think there will be some need for external regulation? I mean, I'm just thinking, even there is a very big long tail of influencers, of course, but even the biggest ones, someone like a Stephen Bartlett, who's huge in this country, has also been credibly accused of peddling health misinformation, right? So at what point do you feel like, as from the commercial end, you can step in and say, maybe we don't want to be against things that I guess are trusted by some people, but are not necessarily purveyors of trustworthy information, versus a need for an external body to come in and say, actually, hey, we should regulate this?
I don't see a need for an external body. And one should again draw the distinction between any ads that appear or are spoken by the creators or the influencers and other content which they're engaged in. We can only look at the advertising part, and that has got rules, and the ASA's own AI is getting more and more competent at scanning and monitoring. It'll be 50 million ads, I think, in the past year. It'll be as many again this year. And through that use of data science, we actually are covering a very wide waterfront. And I think, as I say, I think that, it's maturing, as Matt has commented. And although, in a long tail, just as has always been the case, there'll be anomalies, I think that the big end, the big audience end, the grown-up end, the brand usage end, the big agency group end is going to be in pretty good shape.
I think one of the things we write about the ASA, and we do in the book, and we do a couple of different interviews, one with Guy Parker. The transformation that's happening in the ASA is, again, in the context of the history, pretty mind-blowing. You go back a few years and the average sort of number of complaints in any one given year that came in by the public was a few thousand. And now you're talking about proactive monitoring of up to 50 million ads in sensitive categories that they're in control of and can then go out. And so that sort of scaling of that kind of compliance tracking, I think, is an incredibly important development alongside the way in which the influencer creator market is growing and online advertising is growing in order to keep it trusted.
It's interesting that the ASA is using AI tools to scale its process. And on the other side, you have people using AI tools to create, God knows, large amounts of content online. You also have AI being used now by all the major broadcasters to create TV ads as well. And of course, they've written some BCAP compliance into that so that they're trying to be compliant. But at the moment, I think the public perception on any AI ad, or any AI content, whether it's on social or on telly, seems pretty negative.
I think that's right. I mean, from what we've picked up, we do ask that question quarterly in our Kratos tracking, and people are a bit worried. They don't really understand it. They don't quite know what's going on. There's all the discussion about labeling and transparency. Again, it's so new, we don't know where it'll go, but the same principles apply to any ad, regardless of what technologies have been involved in creating and distributing it. The same rules apply. So I don't really see that it's going to be an insuperable challenge. I think it's just another challenge, as previous ones have been over the last 100 years, and we'll manage it.
Yeah, I mean, if you come back to what makes a brilliant, trusted advertising campaign that helps a brand to win versus its competitive set, we've got a big long chapter called "What Does Good Look Like?" and we've dug into the IPA effectiveness data bank and looked at brands like a Tesco or brands like a Nurofen, brands like McDonald's, that have had trust issues and then built trust through brilliant advertising campaigns. What are the ingredients of that? Brilliant creative quality of work that people enjoy, smart media choices that are backing that, consistency of that brand promise and delivering that brand promise. I think those are all really important things if you're looking to essentially build the trust in your brand versus the competitors.
In the book, and James, you mentioned you spoke to a number of industry leaders. I think you interviewed 70 industry leaders, give or take. What else stood out to you from speaking with people? What are their concerns? What are their excitements?
I mean, one thing that stood out was just how not just willing, but kind of eager people were to talk about the importance of trust in their part of the environment. I mean, marketers talking about how they saw trust in their brands as, foundational imperative, something they couldn't let slip. Media owners competing, as we know, to be the most trusted medium, clearly believing it really matters and has value. And of course, agencies wanting their creative work to be trusted by their audiences because they work better that way. And everybody was very strong on that. Now, in the media terms, it was a competitive game, but nonetheless one that everybody wanted to be good at. It, as Matt said, varied by sector, but everybody stressed that. What was also interesting was that not that many people directly measure it. Measure lots of things. I mean, performance first and foremost, probably, but quite often they'll be measuring a proxy, you could say, for trust, something like reputation or for me-ness. But it was interesting that although they all felt trust so important, not everybody had thought, hang on a minute, are we actually checking that one out? And one of the aims of the book, I guess, is that everybody should take trust as a fundamental KPI, really. And
how do you measure that? I mean, is there any way to when you're talking with the chief media planner, say, or the creative strategist, say, okay, we can look at this score before the campaign and then this score after and decide, okay, I think we nailed our trust KPI. Has that been built yet? Can that be even built?
I think it can be built. Has it been built? There's no one single size, cookie cutter kind of solution. Some brands talked about net promoter score and a number of metrics that ladder up to that, likely to recommend to a friend or family member. And actually, one of the most compelling arguments for trust as a business success point is the gift-gaff case study that we've got, where it's something like 1 in 5 new customers come through friend or family recommendation. You can't get a much more powerful example of a trusted brand performance metric than that. 20% of your new customer base coming from somebody who already uses you, recommending you. And if you look at gift-gaff's marketing and advertising overall, they really major in on trust and responsibility. And they talk about their customers not as customers, they talk about them as members of their community. There's a very smart sort of way of thinking about managing their customer base, that they're actually, if you like, stakeholders in the gift-gaff community.
How much does it come down to having a really great, trustworthy product as opposed to a really great, trustworthy ad campaign?
You cannot build trust in a brand if you haven't got a trusted product or service behind it, and we're very clear about that in the book. I think it was James Murphy who said, the advertising can't cover up the problems with a brand or service. What it does is it helps you really express and sell why you are better when you're better, right? And really, really, reinforce that, and that's where that premium value of being a more trusted kind of brand comes through.
We've talked all through different parts of the book. I've got it here in front of me. What are we at here? 250 some odd pages, give or take.
Would you believe it? All that for so little.
I mean, I've never written a book that long, so I'll let you know.
I've never read a book that long.
I don't believe you at all. I don't trust you.
Oh, no.
If you had to boil it down to a single thesis statement, I mean, obviously, I think people should go and read it and look at all the different case studies. But what would the thesis of the book be? What do people need to take away from the book?
Well, we've probably both got our own way to express it. I think I'd say there's 3 things. First, just how much trust does matter and impact on business success. Second, that it is quite fragile and you've got to protect it, think about it. And third, you can build trust and sustain trust. And when you do, you win.
Matt?
Yeah, James has summed that up really well. I would say that, right now, any business, should be having a conversation about whether or not we're trusted and what do we want to be trusted for, and how are we going to build the trust and what the promise is through our advertising and deliver on that. And that isn't easy at all, but that is at the heart of this book and the heart of I think, business success in the 21st century and the times that we're living in. If you're the most trusted brand in your given sector, you're probably going to be the most successful as well.
Do you have any anxieties about the subject of trust after doing all the work required for this book?
I think it's getting more and more complicated to be able to build trust through your advertising in a brand. It's much more complex than it was, because of the multitude of opportunities you've got to do that. And also, Jessica Tamzage from Dentsu was very clear that you used to be able to control the trust messages about your brand. And now you can't. Other people will be inputting into whether or not your brand is trusted and trustworthy.
They'll be in the comment sections.
Well, yeah, and they're influencers, and
Right.
they're influencers of influencers, and so there'll be lots of people having a conversation about whether or not your brand is trustworthy. So the management of that conversation and working out where and how your brand fits into that 24/7 with every single customer to be, is a very, very big technical challenge.
Yeah, and I think it is worrying that when you ask people just straight up, do you trust advertising? you'll often get a positive answer. Go a little bit behind that, as we have some recent qualitative work, and they're thinking classic advertising. They're thinking TV ads, posters. What they're experiencing, which is far more obviously the online world, has got a different vibe. And that's where people are talking about having to have this constant sort of state of vigilance, becoming wary, because there has been too much abuse in that of their credibility or their credence.
Do people not even realize that so much of what they consume on a platform like TikTok or Instagram, say, is advertising? I mean, is it not even, when someone says advertising, to your point, it's not even necessarily in their consideration set that maybe 1 in 6 TikTok posts is an ad?
They are aware, and they don't like it when they feel that they don't know. I mean, again, quite naturally, and we have always had, and it is actually a law of the land rather than just an ASA thing, that ads have to be recognizable as ads. And when that boundary is blurred, that's one of the things that makes advertising suspicious to people. And these are things which, we can clear up given a bit of will and effort.
Okay. Last question. What's next for you both from a writing standpoint? Do you want to write another book? Is there already another deal with the publisher? Are there other topics that you would want to hone in on if you were given the time and resource to write another book?
Well, right now, to be fair, we are writing more content about trust and really sort of exploring all of the different kind of areas that you can sort of build on top of this. I think it is, we talk about this idea of trust being box office gold, right? Why are we so interested in Traitors? Because it's essentially a popular culture game of trust and deceit. Okay, so it's a very interesting sort of cultural phenomenon right now, right at this time. And then you look at geopolitics and whether or not we can trust world leaders with our safety and our future. So whether I turn to popular culture or the biggest, hardest news, trust is kind of everywhere. So right now, we're sort of exploring more and more about trust and this conversation, because I think, at the core of it is the business reason. Make sure you're the most trusted in the room, and you will win.
Pretty simple. All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Simple, but actually really hard to manage. So good luck to everyone out there. James, Matt, thanks so much for your time. This has been a total pleasure.
Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader Podcast. Our executive producer is me, Jack Benjamin. Special thanks to our production partner, Trisonic. You can find all our episodes on the podcast platform of your choice or on our website at uk.themedialeader.com. But do please remember to subscribe to be notified of our next episode. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at The Media Leader to receive daily coverage of all the biggest news stories in media and advertising. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm Jack Benjamin. See you next time.